I'd like to call the Facilities and Finance Committee meeting to order. I'll be filling in for our committee chairman, Ryan, who's not here tonight. Our first item is the budget development calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhardt. The budget development calendar for the upcoming budget will look similar to the framework that we have used in past years. Really, the framework outlines the process that we use through the budget development process, through the fall and winter months. Really, what we're looking for there is to do a needs assessment across the district with a representative group of stakeholders to say what should we do in the upcoming budget and what adjustments do we need to make. And so, as an example, the stakeholders that we engage include our department coordinators. It includes our non-instructional administrators, so people like our facilities director and our transportation director. It includes our 8 building principals, and then ultimately cabinet, like Mr. Bitts and Mr. Bigham, to look at things from a system perspective or district perspective. I want to just pause and take a moment. I think it's always worth reflection. Our budget process, I think, is very thorough and comprehensive, and I've always appreciated everyone's involvement in it. So for the people that you see listed in the document there, a lot of time and effort goes into those meetings. And then Mrs. Haldeman and Mrs. Swihart helping coordinate all of those meetings is also of great appreciation. And so I think in the end, it culminates in a very thorough budget process from my perspective. And really the budget process is that of almost a year-long process, because even as we head into the fall, we've already spent the summer looking at some of the trends to say, how did we do in the year we just closed out in 2022-23? And so we'll be returning to the board at some of the mileposts that we've outlined in that budget calendar later this fall, heading into winter, and then early spring. So.
Any questions? Move this ahead to next week's meeting.
Yep.
Next item is the federal grants update. Mr. Longwell.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhardt. So about this time of year, as the board probably recalls, we normally have looked at in different formats, kind of what are our proposed grants and how are we looking to spend those monies. Later this fall, we will return with our document, our one-pager that kind of endorses generally the grants and the budgets contained therein. But because we're still on the tail end of those COVID-19 monies and some of the additional state funding that we received, we felt it would be worthwhile to have a little more in-depth conversation and a presentation to talk about some of those additional grants that we've received in the last several years. And so as a reminder, when you talk about grants and the budget, we have our recurring federal grants, which include Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, and IDEA. Those are our biggest ones. It's not meant to be an all-inclusive list, but just a reminder about our grants that we receive on a year-to-year basis. We won't necessarily spend a lot of time on those recurring grants this evening, but rather focus on the next 2 bullet points, the COVID-19 relief funding that we've received since the beginning of the pandemic, and those grants in particular where we still have some money left and some spending left to do here in the 2023-24 school year. Also, some additional state grants that we've received to support mental health and security, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. I think 50,000-foot view, when you talk about grants and budget and how do you manage that and put all of this back together, you know, we have looked at things through the lens of supplant and supplement. And so with any grant, we evaluate the restrictions of the grant and how are the monies to be used. And so then there's a balance there between what grants should support our annual budget, but then also what grants might provide funding for new initiatives. And always new initiatives, we try to be careful too, in knowing that there's a sustainability component to that, that if the grant money were to eventually dry up, what do you do in those situations? And so there's always a balance between how do you use the grants, the support for the annual budget, but also what new initiatives are part of that process. A quick snapshot of the grants that are outstanding. Again, not our recurring grants, but looking at COVID-19 relief in the top list there, and then those bottom two with PCCD are additional state grants. ESSER 3, we'll talk a little bit more detail here on the next slide, but ESSER 3 is our biggest outstanding grant, and ESSER 3, frankly, was the biggest grant of all the federal grants that we got anyway that was connected to the pandemic. ARP Homeless, Act 24, the supplemental IDEA are also grants not nearly as large. We'll talk very briefly about that in some following slides. And then also some money connected to mental health and physical security, and what are some thoughts about additional state grants. And so in totality, you can see between the COVID-19 relief funding that we have left to spend down this fiscal year in 23-24, coming in close to 1.4 million, along with some additional state monies that we got from PCCD of around 135,000. Those will support either the budget in terms of actual operations or in terms of supplementing our efforts and newer initiatives, or ongoing initiatives, I should say. So as an example, support, if we talk about the biggest grant, ESSER 3, support for the annual budget would include things like reading and math materials, are the costs, some of the costs connected to our health services department, particularly our nurses, summer school at the secondary level, Keola courses, which is the district's platform for providing education in a cyber format. Examples of additional funding for new initiatives include an additional instructional coach at the secondary level. So the board probably recalls in a budget a couple of years ago, we had included a position for one additional secondary instructional coach. Through our conversations about academic achievement and support for the system, we added a second additional instructional coach a second additional instructional coach at the secondary level. That is funded through this grant. We added some additional resources around psychology intern. We've also looked at some additional staffing in the areas of English language development, reading, special education, music instruction, and then ultimately the comprehensive plan goals, which Mr. Bitts just presented on here at last month's meeting, or at the last meeting. The positive behavior intervention support is connected to one of our comprehensive plan goals, and so we're using some additional monies out of these grants to support those initiatives and move those efforts forward. ESSER 3, we took a little deeper dive on what are examples of funding and how we're using that, but I still think it's important to hit on those other grants that we talked about, either the other federal grants or those PCCD monies. And so we wanted to more generally speak to what are our plans for the 23-24 school year. And so with mental health, the PCCD grant there, we're looking at a contracted behavioral coach that will be funded through this school year. Also around physical security, we've done some upgrades in the buildings. Due to the sensitive nature of that, won't speak specific to what those upgrades were, but that we've continued to use the money and deploying resources there to support our efforts around physical security. Homeless is supplemental support for those homeless students. That's through Mr. Bigham's office and the requirements of what we do, what we're required to provide to those students experiencing homelessness. Act 24 is really connected to learning loss, after school programs, summer school programs, and so the board may recall for a couple summers now, we've with Mr. Bitts and our elementary team, we've offered a kind of a summer program for elementary achievement, right? You know, and that was something we looked at to support our efforts with academic achievement. Through the school year, we've also offered an after-school program for the middle school. And so again, efforts to supplement our existing programs and assist in support of students. The ARP supplemental IDEA, we're looking there at interpreting services and contracted IA substitute services. And so really, I think what you can see through these last two slides, whether it be ESSER 3 or some of the smaller buckets of money individually with these grants, is that we've deployed the money in two ways. One is in support of our annual budget, but also in support of initiatives that will assist with supporting students and our programs through the 23-24 school year. Sorry, the clicker is up. So with that said, that was a very quick overview of the grants that are currently outstanding, those being connected to COVID-19 relief and our state funds, and our plans for the 23 and 24 school year, which we're currently operating.
I just want to take a minute to compliment Mr. Longwell and the entire business office. As nice as it is to have these grant funds come in, there is a lot of regulation and paperwork, if you will, around maintaining these. And as we look forward here now in the not too distant future, as these funds begin to expire, I know that there are districts out there that have used this money to offset their budget, and that's can be a very dangerous thing. And again, to Mr. Longwell's credit, that's not how we've used this with a long-range plan. We have done that in the short term, but we're building it back into the budget as the years progress, so that we don't see this massive cliff that has happened other times when significant monies are out there. So good things are happening around that, and it's also allowing us to build some capacity within our staff, so that when this does go away, we've developed the staff in different ways, which has really been our emphasis around the coaching model, and as you saw in a couple of cases.
But we've always been very careful of looking at the money and understanding what money to apply to short term and what money not to apply to continuous expenses that we would see year after year after year. Always thinking back to what we did with budget money in previous years.
Exactly. You don't want to pay your mortgage out of this money, that's for sure. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Longwell. Last item is the auxiliary gym at the high school. Mr. Longwell.
Thank you, Ms. Burkhart. So the auxiliary gym, we've provided some information in prior board updates about the auxiliary gym and some of our planned next steps. And so we wanted to come back to the board and discuss some of the work we've done since then. And so really, what we've done to begin looking at possible solutions and what we want to do in the auxiliary gym, Mr. Kastner worked with Crabtree Rohrbaugh to identify possible solutions and what might we do around the gym floor. They looked at other area organizations to see what solutions they've used. And in the end, what our recommendation is to install a new floor over top of the existing, which will seal the entire floor. But also, we are comfortable in those other area solutions, and this is the right solution for us moving forward as part of the high school construction project. The cost of the project is right around $53,000, and so it fits in with the project timeline and project scope, and we're comfortable with recommending that solution because of the investigation we've done, looked at other areas that have looked at this as a solution, other organizations that have looked at this as a solution in the area, and ultimately because it is at that $53,000 level, as the board recalls, in change orders, that rises above that $50,000 threshold where we would have the conversation with the finance committee versus maybe at a $10,000 or $20,000 level, we'd be talking about that administratively in terms of keeping the project moving along.
Questions?
Tracy's not here to ask about, she's the change order.
Yeah.
Oh, hi Tracy. She always asks about the change orders, and she always has concerns about the change orders.
I'd favor moving it forward for vote next week. Obviously keep the project going, eliminate the issue.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's the last item on our list. Meeting.